Unexpected edition of Dualistic Unity Raw call-in edition. This is only an hour long today, so this is something that we're going to be doing in replacement to what we were doing, which was a weekly community topics episode. So now we're going to be doing these live episodes every Thursday, maybe at 5 p.m. Eastern time. We're not sure about the time as yet, but we're going to be doing a live show, which is a call-in show every Thursday, except for one Thursday, which will be the monthly community topics. So I'm excited about this. If you would like to participate, then by all means, dualisticunity.com/live. There's a form that you have to fill in because you have to agree this is going to be an episode and you're okay with that. And aside from that, you can join us on the screen for like 10 minutes.
Hell yeah. It's kind of funny because this was more, at least this week, like more spur of the moment because I had totally forgotten we weren't doing community topics every single week anymore. And so I sent out that, and then, we're not doing that. So we're doing the call-in show. And it's like, it's interesting, just my mindset. And I'm guessing Ray's is not similar to this in the sense of like feeling more just like relaxed, because this is kind of like a extra thing tossed in. Not that I'm not always relaxed, but it's like there's no idea of what this is, maybe. And so therefore it's more relaxing in a sense, because it was like just thrown on there, as opposed to, we're getting on a Twitch live stream, on an episode, on whatever, on this. And like, even though there's no additional expectation with that, there's still the label. And with that comes like some semblance of a made up expectation just that I have for myself. And so it's like not so much there on this one. So I don't know. It's kind of funny. That's just what I was realizing getting onto this one as we were talking before the call for a bit.
Oh, I love these. And I'm way past the point where there's no anxiety with this anymore. And the only reason is because I've already said a bunch of shit that at some point in my life, I was like, I should probably not say that in public. And I have. And it's only because, again, we've done so many episodes. Today, we're celebrating our 200th episode, not this one, but the one that was released earlier today, which is community topics number 37 on feeling better versus getting better. So out of those 200 episodes, each episode is approximately an hour to 2 hours long. So there's a lot of hours of content there in general. And I know I've said a bunch of things that if somebody were to take it out of context, I would more than likely get crucified. So at this point, I'm way past the point of caring.
Yeah, and it's not even, it wasn't even like a nerves or something or anxiety. It's just like a different idea, like a lack of an idea going in. And so it's like I don't know, like less structure, maybe less anything really. I'm just like hanging out. Yeah, exactly. It's like just how, I hesitate to say should be, but how it always could be. It always could be for every conversation, interaction, call we do. It's just like chilling more so. But yeah, anyway, I just went on a run in between our last, what do we have? A Patreon tier 2 call before this. Went on a run in between, and I took a microdose this morning, smoked some weed before all of our calls, and then smoked a bunch more after our last call, and went on a run and didn't listen to music for the first time. And it was an interesting experience in the sense of like, it was very much like a mushroom trip, sort of, but slightly different. Like, I swear with weed, when I get really high, it's like I'm just in it. Like, I'm like more so than on mushrooms, even. Like, it's more of the experience of like that clarity. And I think I've said this before, but I just find it interesting that mushrooms, I don't know, they're very different. And it's like I'm in the center of the universe more so on weed sometimes. And then when I was running, it's like that's an experience in and of itself. And being high when running, which I've done before, but I don't know. It was interesting. I had some insights. I think I wrote a couple down somewhere, but yeah. Anyway, it's fun.
I think that's really interesting, and I understand what you're saying. I think the fact is that because you smoked weed before any of these conversations really entered your life, and it was a very different experience, right? And it's just because you're looking at it differently now. So when you're on mushrooms, for example, it's like hitting the accelerator pad, which means that you go through a bunch of insights that you're not even fully processing then and there. Like it is being processed, and you're kind of looking at it going, oh wow, wow. And then after the fact, you're kind of unpacking all of that. With weed, you just kind of slow down a bit. And so while that is also an accelerator pad, it's not quite the same kind of accelerator pad. Like you actually are going through each and every insight kind of as it's hitting you. And you're like, oh, and it's similar, but different in that you're more involved with each and every insight rather than them all leading to something else, leading to something else, leading to something else, which eventually always comes back to you each and every time, right? With weed, I find that you can just kind of savor the insight a little bit more rather than having that experience of speeding through it.
Yeah, and I think because early on when I would do mushrooms, it was just like bang, 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 like getting smacked, when someone's just getting smacked across the face like a bunch in a row, that sort of thing. But there was a lot. It's almost like the layers when you're peeling back layers, the ones further out on an onion or something, there's going to be a lot more there. And as you get closer, it's like less. So initially when you're going through that, it's a lot at once because there's a lot to work through. But then now it's you start to see, I guess, the similarities between the insights too. Like they were always pointing to the same thing, just from a further distance, almost being on that outer layer in a sense. And without that, you start to recognize how similar they all are, and they're all always pointing to the same thing, which is fascinating, that everything we do is kind of pointing to that thing like all the time. And one of the last things I was kind of chewing on was that whole idea that others are just an excuse to not be alone, to say I need that person to like me, saying I need me to like me. And it's just like the ego trying to survive. I need validation from that person. I want my parents to like me. I need that car, something. It's like all just pointing back to you. And we just use others as an excuse. And that makes sense why need is such a I don't know, interesting thing, because like you've said before, in relationships, you tell people like, if I ever need you, I'm leaving, because it's never the reality of what you are needing anything. It's like your continued desire for there to be anyone but you. That's why you need them. So you think it's you needing them in order to become more, but it's even beyond that, you needing them to maintain the illusion. So, yeah.
You're really going around that one a lot lately. Eh? It's funny. Like you and I can have a conversation and it immediately goes right to the deep end. And the important part about the conversation is the fact that we've been having it this whole time. Like if you go back to, I think it was episode 2 or 3 of season 1, there was that insight that you had. It was like, it's all me. So I'm kind of alone. You're like, I don't like that. So I'm just gonna stop thinking about that. And that's a natural response. Absolutely. But it's one of those lessons that, again, it can be quite sobering if you take it too seriously. Like, and that really is just taking it too seriously. Like, it's okay to have people around. It's really just the psychological attachment to them, which comes from a number of places. Like you said, it's not just the ego that needs people, but also, the divine ego, as it were, because we don't want to recognize it's just us. But that process of recognizing it's just us is just recognizing that what we think we are isn't what we are. It's the same process. And so It's not this big serious thing where we have to make a choice. We're already making it. We're already making it. It's just layer by layer by layer, because it is that big of a choice to just stop perceiving reality in a certain way, right? To stop looking at it through such a simplistic lens, because that's really all we're talking about, is that you can perceive reality in the typical way, which is that I am on a planet in a physical form, separate from everything, so on and so forth. Or you can look at the subjective and carry that all the way out to the other side and recognize that they're both true, because neither of them are absolutely correct. There is no internal or external, right? It's all just awareness. And so it's one thing to talk about that. It's another thing to like conceptualize that and create a path out of it, non-duality and all that shit, right? It's another thing to actually take it in, and that's it. And that is why I'm always cautioning you against settling on anything, right? Settling on any perception or any reaction to whatever this insight is, because it's always unpacking. And the reason that people settle on things is so it doesn't continue to unpack, because there's this concern, like, Jesus, the farther I go, like, what is this going to feel like? Is it really going to feel like, it's just me? Is this a serious thing? It's not. It's really not, right? It's just another part of the process of unpacking. So don't settle on it, and it will continue to get deeper. And I say this 20 years in, like, I understand exactly how you feel. I've been going through this for a long time, and I have a kid and a wife, right? So you can imagine how much fun that is to try and wrap your head around when you're like, but she's not separate, that's actually just me, as is my kid. But you learn to look at the experience itself rather than telling yourself what the experience is. And I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. That yeah, it's keeping it light, basically, because you can, and it's interesting, because another thing I was thinking about was like when I'm doing something, and this will be a common thing that comes up, is it, is it Andrew doing it, or is it reality of what I am doing it? And it's always the reality of what I am doing it, just with differing degrees of distortion. Like, even when I think that it's not, even when I think that I did something incorrectly, that was still the reality of what I am. It's just like I'm seeing it as like a piece of clothing, and it's how much you add on to that. You do something, you did what you did, and there's this idea, then afterwards you feel bad. It's like, because Andrew did that, and there's like another jacket goes on, and then you just reinforce that I shouldn't have done it, whatever. And it's like, then all of this stuff just piles up, and it's kind of like in that for those who have seen the movie Soul, when the souls go, and it's like they just get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like more that we're adding to that, but it's always me speaking. It's just how clearly I see that. Like, it doesn't differ, is what I'm trying to say, whether you recognize it or not. It's still me speaking. It's still me doing the thing. It's always me doing all of it. It's just how much is on top of that.
Yeah. So where you are in terms of what you're looking at, that's this reason I laugh. The reason I laugh so wholeheartedly while you're expressing all this is because I clearly hear myself. I clearly hear myself. And what's so funny is that after such a long time of not giving a fuck if you ever expressed it, because who are you if not me? Right. So it's really just about me knowing. All of a sudden, I'm hearing myself express it in quote unquote others. So imagine how trippy that is, to continue on the journey that you're on without anyone ever reflecting it back to you to the degree that you're talking about. And then all of a sudden to have these conversations several times per week, to various degrees and to various different depths, but ultimately in this direction. It's surreal. It really is, to see reality echoing something that I know.
I can only imagine, honestly. But at the same time, I feel exactly the same way to a degree.
When did I
Like,
pop up if not when you were exactly ready for me?
exactly.
It's the same
Yeah.
experience.
Because that's it. Like through like that makes perfect sense coming at it from that point of view. Of course, that's a case. Of course, it makes perfect sense because there's no you and me. There's no you and me. It's yeah, just me, and it's not what you fucking think. Oh God, it's like even even saying that, there's so much opportunity for so much distortion with everything. Everything you say, there is, as soon as you speak, there's room for distortion. And it's dependent on, what people are willing to hear. Like people don't even hear the same shit coming out of your mouth despite saying the same thing. Like you can say the same thing and everyone's going to hear it differently. And we have this idea that everyone's hearing it the same way all the time. And it's never that for anything that you say or talk about. But
That's interesting because if you take the time and listen to anything that you say, you can see it yourself in numerous different ways. You just have to have the practice of being able to recognize that you can exist in numerous different mentalities, right? We tend to think that we have changed, like because we're no longer, say, insecure teenagers. We tend to forget that insecurity is just an option. It's always an option. It's not something you're ever going to leave behind. It's an option in terms of a mentality, and it's an option that you can always access. And so if you were to listen to anything that you say from the perspective of someone who's anxious, you would go, oh yeah, no, I can see how that doesn't land. And that's the practice of empathy, is to recognize as well that everybody's reactions to this are all of your possible reactions to this as well.
exactly. Like all of them are just like you're seeing all of the options through of yourself through reality, all of the different ways to express yourself. Like that, like express yourself. That whole song, like it's just all me expressing itself in all these different ways, thinking and I've just gotten so caught in thinking that I'm wrong. Like I've made crazy standards for myself, and it's always like peak, whatever. And those who don't feel good, and those who do fit like barely feel good, and just because of that. But you look like you just had an insight.
It's funny because we were talking about this perception, and it really is habitual. Like I said, like it's something that we've more or less just gotten caught up in, is the perception of division and individuality and mortality and all that other fun stuff. But what's funny is that we've never stopped being the universe. So it's kind of like this is all just running on autopilot while we distract ourselves. And I think that's kind of funny because the only real difference is that all of a sudden now we've stopped distracting ourselves. Like I've said before, the party's coming to a close. Everybody's aware that we've gotten a little out of hand. It's time to kind of sober up and clean up and do all that. And I think that's very much what this is. But yeah, it just dawned on me that it's just that we're distracted. It's just that we're caught up in this ridiculous illusion. But the rest of the time, well, not even the rest of the time, the whole time, we are still just being everything, right? Everything gets done, nothing is rushed, that kind of thing, except for our experience, of course, which is rushed based on our perspective alone, which is based on our small, limited narrative, which is based on all our fears.
Yeah, because whether you see it or not, you're always doing it. And it's just and we've said it so many times, like it's just the weight. Keep it light, let go of the things holding you back from not even anything, though, because that immediately creates a journey. It's holding you back from what? Holding you back from what? Holding you back from, I guess, being yourself really is just it. Like we don't give ourselves the ability to be ourselves. And so that's what That's what it is. Like, that's what the expression is. It's just, there's varying degrees of that, but it's always there. It's like it's always on its track, and we're just like adding weight or taking away, but it doesn't change the track. And again, people can get caught in thinking, oh, so there's a track. Oh, so there's a path. Not one that isn't you. Like, you're at the forefront of that track. It is you. You are the track and the experience of the track and the experiencer of the track, and none of those things. Like, you're just it. Like, there's and that idea of being on a track with weight and stuff is still, people can take that as like, oh, so I just have to let go and just ride the track. And it's like, yeah, kind of, but everything that you're doing is the track. So there's not some made up idea of a track that you're falling into. You're just taking responsibility for being the track and laying the tracks as you go, like in front of you as you go. Cause that's another, it's funny now that we're talking, the insights on my run are all coming back into my head. But one of them was like, we're at the forefront of reality, but not in the egotistical, like manifest destiny, like technological advancement type shit. It's just, we're at the forefront of reality because we are it. And it's always, the forefront and the end, like the beginning and the end, the alpha and the omega all the time. But like, that we are, pushing through, like everything that we do, everything that we recognize, everything that we talk about, the depths which we're able to go, the willingness to talk about some stupid sexual innuendo stuff. Like, it's all at the forefront, but it's not your idea of what the forefront is. It's not this made up thing like we're charging ahead, but like kind of like that is how I was seeing it. It was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is like, well, it's being responsible for reality. Like, it really is feeling like you are completely involved with what reality is. You're participating in existence itself, as opposed to just trying to survive on the planet, right? It becomes a very different perspective. Everything takes on a whole different meaning in a lot of ways. This is a live show. We've been rambling for a little bit, so I just wanted to take a moment to say hi, Jennifer. I see you in the comment section. I appreciate that you left a comment and you asked for a shout out, so we just gave you one. We also have a question. Can you guys talk about the boundaries or lack thereof of our universe / awareness? I understand the universe we're aware of is our awareness, and that everything could ever exist and potentially exist here and now, but I still feel like it has to have an end or some kind of boundary. How do you all think about this? It's tripped me out so hard. Okay, so aside from your discomfort with the idea that it doesn't have an end, is there any real reason for you to assume it doesn't? The fact that you can keep thinking about it, the fact that you're tripping so hard, implies that there's still more to think of. And so don't take my word for it by any means. You keep looking. You just keep staring at everything that you are. Just remember that you can get lost in it, to the point where you actually start to forget what you're doing right now, right? But you're never going to find the end of you. In the same way, we're never going to find the end of existence or the end of the universe, the end of the moment. We're never going to find the end of any of it, right? Because it's all limitlessness. The fact that you can keep staring at it and seeing more is kind of the clue. But I encourage you, keep staring at it.
And I encourage you to maybe take a break from time to time. It's funny, like that got brought up, like staring at the abyss or the void or whatever. Because back in November, I sort of had that where I was just staring at it for hours, and after that, there was a period where I was a little bit nervous about like taking mushrooms and weed together, because that's what triggered it on that day for me. Well, I say that's what triggered it, but it was just me, obviously. And but you know what I mean. And since then, there was a couple weeks where I was like, didn't want to do that shit, and now like I've kind of seen it from different perspectives and ways, shapes, and forms, and feel more like it's always right there, but there's so much less fear of it now. And I guess that's just the settling in, but at the same time, like, you know, there's probably going to be another time where I'm fucking knocked on my ass, but there isn't the concern for that so much, which, you know, I said that before I saw that day and it happened. So I've kind of gotten done with making any assumptions about where I'm at or what I'm going through or what's to come. But yeah, with the edge of the universe, like, you know, the idea of there being an edge is just an idea. Like, where is there an edge to anything in reality ever? Like, in your experience here now, like, as you know, person that you are living in the town, that like, where there are no edges, bounds, and it's a conceptual idea, like, just really not wanting to sit in that infinite eternity. And it's like the avoidance of that, basically. And that's what a lot of things we're doing, whether we recognize it or not, is the avoidance of that. But yeah.
I just wanted to mention very quickly, I did throw a link into the chat section of this live stream. We did an episode on realization and the Pulitzer Prize, actually not the Nobel Prize in physics for the non-local universe. I highly recommend you check that out, because the fact is the universe doesn't actually exist anywhere, which is quite nice. And it throws a kink in the whole question that you were asking about, you know, well, what is, if the universe is contained within something, what is that contained within? It's not contained within anything. It doesn't actually exist anywhere at all whatsoever without an observer. It's just that we experience space and time as a result of there being the perceived division between the observer and the observed. It doesn't actually exist anywhere because there is no actual division. So it's almost fictitious, except for the fact that from our perspective, it's absolutely real.
Yeah. And yeah, that one, it's an interesting one, to say the least. But it's funny to recognize that. And it's interesting how people will talk about that and recognize that this is all a hallucination, or none of this is real, and yet take it really goddamn seriously and take themselves really goddamn seriously. And not that, because, like, again, it's because they're taking the idea of it being real or unreal as a conceptual idea all the time. Like, those are just, again, just words. Like, it is what it is. It's like, I don't want to say it's irrelevant to how we label it, but to a degree, I mean, it is, but I'm not going to discount the fact that someone recognizing that it's not as real as they think. Like, there's a shift where it's less, there's a little less weight. You take things a little bit less seriously, because for a while you were settling upon the fact that it's real. It means a lot. It matters a ton. Everything's riding on everything. But when it comes down to it, they're just words anyway. Like, everything, I get it. And it's like, yeah, obviously everything is a concept, but being real, or like, there, some of the arguments or thoughts about things are, I don't want to say they're irrelevant, but in a way they are. And like, you are where you're at. You are here and now. And it's like, how many things you're settling upon, not the willingness to continue to question that's causing the distortion and the need to conceptualize everything else, and the need to have, you know, the thought of there must be an edge to the universe, and, oh, is this real or not? And it's like, I don't know. I'm just trailing off.
Hey, man, it's as good as any other question. I mean, this is the whole thing about having eternity and limitless will, is that we're going to explore each and every cranny and nook that we can. in terms of what all of this is. This is why I did that video once upon a time about this being a dream, and in the dream, different characters would try to explain the dream in different ways, right? Whether it be philosophy or religion or science, which is really just the act of observing the dream, breaking it down as far as we can to try and figure out what the dream is made of. Problem is that it's a dream, which means that you, as the dreamer, every time you look deeper, there's more to see. In the same way as if you look out into the universe when you're dreaming, there's going to be more and more and more universe, because there's more and more and more you, and there's more and more experience because it's all driven by you. And so philosophy, religion, science, all that stuff, it really is just our ability, or our, yeah, basically it's just us trying to explore the dream, trying to figure it out, trying to ignore the obvious reality, and to satisfy our most basic wants and needs as a result. And that's really what it is. We're just beating around the bush so we can be selfish at the end of the day.
Yeah. Fuck. There it goes. There it goes. What was the thing before the last thing you were saying?
That's a damn good question. I don't know if I'd be able to tell you that. And I really do like that experience. I like, it really is just going with the flow and seeing where it goes. I do want to mention to everybody who's watching, this is a live show, and you can join us for a call-in show. We only have 25 minutes left, but if you'd like to, you can. DualistiCunity.com/live. And there's a form you have to fill out, and then you can jump on the podcast episode. But that said, this is fun. I'm really enjoying this. I don't know why we dove straight into the deep end, but fuck it. Why the hell not? It really just keeps coming back down to wanting to take ourselves seriously. Like, we really have this addiction to thinking about ourselves, because frankly, the alternative is to just be where we are. And if you are not used to that, there's almost this temptation to go, well, that's kind of boring. And more than likely it's not. It's just that you yourself lack an interest in being involved with whatever is happening right now. And so it's easier to kind of shuffle it off as, oh, I'm just bored, right? But there's always something to do here and now. There's always something happening. Like, there's never not something happening, is what I'm saying. And even if you're in a room by yourself, there's just a shit ton that you can learn about yourself. There's a bunch of things that you can do in terms of self-exploration and self-honesty and all that stuff. I don't know where I was going with that, but I guess that's the whole point, is just to let it flow and see where it goes. And I'm going to pass it back to you now.
Dope. Yeah, the funny, because without so much idea of yourself, it's like it always requires maintenance. It's like a fucking car that's way too old and it's just always in the shop. And so it has no ability to explore reality. It's like, oh, wow. It's like you're always in the shop. You're always working on something. You know, I'm working on myself. I'm becoming better. I'm working on this. I'm letting I'm letting go of this. And any of it is being in the fucking auto body shop as opposed to driving around. And the idea, and the funniest part is the car is perfectly functional. And it's like you're in the shop either making it worse or looking at it thinking that it's broken or being it. Yeah, I'm afraid to drive. Exactly. Yeah. Like you're coming up with all these excuses not to drive, basically. And it's like you're in there and the mechanic is like, dude, there's nothing wrong with this. And you're like, yes, there is. Look at that. And he's like, no, it's actually how it was, how it's meant
supposed to make that
be.
noise.
Yeah. Exactly. And you just won't, you're so afraid of taking it out. It's like you're coming up with all this shit that's wrong with it. And all this is all it is coming to the recognition that there's nothing wrong with the car and going and driving and seeing what's that's like from the perspective of you, obviously, in, imagery is what I'm trying to get across here. But it's that idea that there's something wrong with it that hinders our ability to explore. And so when we're sitting alone, we have the potential to explore, but we're still in that spot trying to fix shit that isn't actually there, trying to deal with shit that would happen. It's also like you're trying to repair it, and there's like a robot that's just kind of waiting there to repair if there were issues or whatever. It's like your brain processing, and we get in there trying to fix stuff, and there's a perfectly capable thing of dealing with all the stuff that's always happening, and it's just us going in and then trying to fix it. So yeah, I could probably take this analogy any which way, but I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I understand. There really is a lot that we do in terms of just we want something to be wrong to some degree, right? Like we really do, or we become so self-obsessive that we find something wrong, right? Like that's the problem with being self-obsessive and being under the mentality of having control, is you actually start thinking you can change anything that doesn't make you happy, rather than practicing acceptance as a whole, right? Which is a different experience, but it really is that whole thing of like, I gotta change this. I gotta change it. I don't like the way this is. It's gotta change. It's like, you don't necessarily have to do that. You can also accept it or not give a fuck, right? And understand why you give a fuck, and understand the nature of obsession. Like I've talked about my past with OCD. I understand what it's like to just keep coming back to something over and over and over again, just because you're not satisfied. There's nothing in there where you can just walk away and feel like, yep, I'm good now. It like, I understand that, but that's the point, is to walk away and not be good with it. Sometimes some things don't have a resolution except to just stop focusing on them, because there's always going to be a problem if you look for a problem, always.
Yeah, that shift in that desire for control, thinking you can control everything. And that's kind of, I guess, the spectrum of ego is how much you think you can control and take hold and take control of your mind and your happiness, as opposed to just the letting go of that, is the letting go of everything convincing you that you're not happy. Like in that Peaceful Warrior movie we did the movie review on recently. Great movie, and it's that recognition, like, letting go of himself. That's what he had to let go of, and without that, there is so much opportunity to do fucking anything, but it's a different energy. It's not from that source of egotistical validation and feeling good. It's just you. It's just being you for the sake of being you, and the willingness to do that.
Absolutely. We do have somebody here in the queue who's been on the show before. Of course, it's Jazz. Jazz wants to discuss nothing specific. We are going to try and discuss something specific. Otherwise, we're just going to end up chasing our tails for 10 minutes. So we're going to come up with some kind of a subject, and we're going to tackle it. And that's going to be what this conversation is. How you doing, Jazz? Nice of you to join us.
What's up, Jazz?
Hey guys. So I joined today because it's distracting to see two of you at the same time, but I joined today because I was thinking about the opportunity for hosting Patreon groups and stuff, and I was thinking about how there's some anxiety I feel that I have about how I wouldn't have stuff to talk about, for like how you guys just keep going and going and going and go back and forth as well. And the thing that I like about the Patreon calls that we do, the private ones, is that if I don't have something to say, or like, I don't know, if I don't have anything to talk about, then I can just put my hand down and let you guys get back to whatever you guys want to get back to. And that's also one of the reasons why I never joined the call-in show, was because I'm just here now and I don't, so I just wanted to join and just see what would happen. I mean, I was thinking about this right before I joined, and it's that the worst that can happen is that I embarrass the shit out of myself and not say anything. And I don't care. That's fine too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this is the nice thing about the call-in show, is that there are no expectations. You can come onto the show, though it's nice to have something to talk about. Regarding the Patreon hosting groups and whatnot, this is definitely something that you're welcome to toss an email our way. And right now we're just going through considerations for who's going to host and what times they're available and so on and so forth. But in terms of hosting the groups, I will say it is a bit different than a call-in show, because it really is about some sensitivity in terms of guiding the conversation to some degree, as well as keeping it light at the end of the day and leaving everything about your own story at the door. I mean, that's a big part. Running a group is actually a lot like coaching, not, at the end of the day, because you're always leaving yourself at the door. It's never about you, right? It's always about everybody else's experience, what they're getting out of it, and how seamless that experience might be. It's always about facilitating, genuine goodwill and intention. But aside from that, it's an opportunity to really serve others. And so there's a big role of that in the groups. And I'm just saying this for anybody who's currently joining us who hasn't joined a Patreon group. That's very much what it's like, is we just want you to get the most out of it that you can. Right. And so it's a bit different than a call-in show, because you can just stop talking at some point. But as Andrew and I have both experienced from the Patreon groups, occasionally there's just dead air, and you got to go reaching for an insight and just fill it with space that you want to fill it with, because that's what you're there for anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up about the difference in live call, as well as just I think Patreon call as well, like from my perspective of being part of the Patreon call, which is that I can ramble about my story or whatever, or what's happening. And sometimes, and for you guys, it is a different role, I guess. And I've been thinking about the aspect of counseling and therapy, and how differently sometimes counselors can approach things. And it's like some counselors approach it with, okay, so you got this problem, now let's dissect it and let's figure out it, like let's label it and let's figure out what kind of coping mechanisms you can come up with, so that when it's happening, then you can avoid, I don't know, it's kind of a problem dissection and resolution type, rather than a conversation where you are relating to that person and being there in that kind of a capacity. And it's really, I think it really changes what both people can get out of it, out of that conversation. And yeah, so it makes me really interested in the coaching workshop you guys did. Yeah.
Yeah,
that was a fun workshop.
Yeah, it's definitely a different approach. And I had never been to therapy, but just based on what I've seen and looked into and talked to people about, it's like going in without the recognition of what you actually are, and the being involved in identity. Essentially, there is an assumption that there's always something wrong and there's something that has to be fixed, as opposed to going into the call recognizing that there's nothing wrong. And so just being there with them and allowing them to, giving them the space to come to that recognition themselves. But it's not like, because as soon as you push too much, then it's you're looked at as not looked at necessarily immediately, but as someone who did it. And like, in order to actually get it, you can't pass the buck on to anyone else. You can't say like, oh, you did this for me. It's like, I resonated with the insight you provided, but you didn't push it necessarily too much. And the and yeah, just with the groups versus, whatever, it's definitely it's definitely a balance, because it's not that we obviously pull from examples from our life all the time, but it's more so in response, in resonating with the situation and sharing some perspective, more or less, than anything. It's never advice. It's never to help. It's just kind of, here's something that happened to me and sounds similar, and so there it is. But yeah, it's not really something you can be too self-involved with, like trying to get something out of it, and I know Ray and I both have gone through things in our own lives that isn't reflected in the calls, because that's not what we're there for. That's not what we're doing it for. It's like, it really is for the group and for the sake of the conversation. And if we're super involved in like Andrew or Ray's situation, it's kind of going to distort the whole thing.
Yeah, there's also a certain degree of sensitivity that just builds over time. Like it really is like you can feel the weight of a conversation, and sometimes conversations get heavy, but it shouldn't be by the host for the most part, right? Because that's not helping anyone. It's really just about, again, facilitating that room for change.
Right. Yeah. This reminds me of how there have been times where I've associated with or identified with some kind of identity that helped me feel like I was on the path or on the ball, and that and I think that kind of made it harder to resonate with someone who I perceived as not being on the ball. And so then there's the opposite of a willingness, a not willingness to go into that space in yourself where you are seeing them in. And so you're not willing to jump into that hole. And so you can't necessarily resonate, or you can't necessarily relate and bring what, or, like there's times where you're like, when you are open to that, when you are open to having those, like, when you are open to those experiences where you're super low or super, I don't know, like depressed or whatever, then you will have those, like when someone is talking about their experience of being low or something, then you are willing to go into that hole with them because you're not so afraid of being there, because you realize that is it as well. Like all of it is it. And so, yeah, that makes it a lot easier to I'm learning from this. I'm learning from this call-in show already.
Well, we appreciate that. No, I'm glad that you brought this up because it is something that we've been talking about in Patreon. We do have some guest hosts that are coming up on our Patreon groups, which we're very excited about. So yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought this up, and I'm glad that it's something that you're looking into, because it's not just about coaching or running groups or anything. It really does change our relationship. I mean, one of the things I love about Dualistic Unity and the groups on Patreon is the fact that just like my marriage or anything else, it really is an opportunity to serve and to recognize that maybe my shit's not as important as I think. Maybe I'm not alone and all that stuff. Like, it really is just a chance to relate and empathize to a greater degree, because you're not in the way. You have a chance to put yourself down willingly, right? And I'll admit that a lot of therapists can't do that. A lot of therapists like the training of, this equals this equals this, and then you just diagnose that. And it's because it's easier. Frankly, I mean, it's easier, and you can get liability insurance for doing so, right? And the difference is with this is that there's no liability insurance because you're responsible for yourself. We're not even offering to fix you or fix anyone. Like, we're just giving you a chance to go through your shit, and people are going to challenge you and question you, and you're willingly going into that in the group, and that's your opportunity to grow, right? And so we're just trying to make sure nobody's a dick about it. That's basically most of our job. And what's nice about the community and the podcast and the audience that's grown as a result of this community is that nobody really is. There really is no turd in the punch bowl.
Yeah.
Sorry, my speakers stopped working for a couple minutes there.
Yeah, I was curious what was happening there.
That is okay. But Jazz, thank you for calling in and being the only person on today's call-in show. We really appreciate that, as well as for bringing up the fact that we have Patreon groups, which is always kind of nice. So we appreciate the marketing.
Cool. Yeah, appreciate the talk, guys. Have a nice day and weekend.
You too, Jazz. Great chatting.
And actually, on that note, we should mention that our Patreon schedule has changed this week. We are still doing our tier 3 call on Sunday at 1 o'clock. I think it's 1 o'clock Eastern time. I could be wrong, or 1:30. It's 1:30 Eastern time. But we are going to be doing Dualistic Unity Raw tomorrow morning instead of Sunday morning, and then a tier 2 call after that. So it's going to be 8:30 Pacific, so 11:30 Eastern time that we're going to be doing Dualistic Unity Raw. Our schedule is changing as we go into season 5, and I will be posting that new schedule to the website, which you can download with Google Calendar or any other calendar app, probably in the next few days.
Oh yeah, I'm excited for just everything going on There's a lot going on, and it requires some shifts. And yeah, we got, book gonna get cooking with here, and just a lot of things, more guest outreach. And so that'll be fun for that to be, because that has not been like a strategy of ours. And there's some cool fucking people we could, chat with and get really fucking deep with, I think, with certain things. And yeah, so that'll be fun. Just a lot happening all the time.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. And admittedly, season 4 has been a full-on sprint for us. Ever since we hit this full time, we have just been trying to pound out the content and the podcast episodes and the community topics and the raw and everything else as often as we can. And it's been a lot. There's been a lot in terms of groups and everything else. And so there is going to be a change in season 5 schedule, in that the raw episodes are going to be a bit shorter. They're going to be about a half hour shorter. So we're just going to be basically talking, and then we're going to have a lot more of these short call-in shows. So that's something that we're hoping the community will get used to in terms of the schedule. I know right now it's almost 6 p.m. Eastern time. So it's a pretty good time. It's just that we didn't announce this except for like an hour before it was going to happen. But we're going to have more call-in shows, more chances for you to basically talk to us, more chances for other people to call in. We're also going to be inviting people on the show who haven't done their due diligence. This is something that I have to mention, and it's something that's really important. I get emails from people all the time wanting to come onto the podcast. The problem is that these people have obviously never watched the podcast. And I say that because they're always channelers or people who have the path to enlightenment or something. It's always some heavy-handed shit where you're just like, oh, this is going to be uncomfortable for everyone. And so I've always disregarded a lot of those contacts, admittedly, because it's going to be unpleasant, more than likely. Not for us, because we try to be pleasant, as somebody may have noticed in some of our most recent episodes with certain guests. But it's not always taken that way. So I figured, fuck it, we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, because also, like, again, not that we're going to be rude or anything. That's going to be our practice in the situation, but they're kind of like in our court. It's not like we're going on their podcast, but at the same time, I guess it's almost a flip of what I was thinking of it. Like, you almost have, not that you have to be anything, but there's less interest in being cordial on someone else's podcast. Like, there can be zero fucks, which reminds me, there was an email from someone who's a channeler of some sort onto their podcast. So I may take that up. As at first I was like, I don't think that's gonna happen. Now I'm like, because there are people like in communities like that are, it's like they're ripe for this conversation, as opposed to, just it's like, there's a lot there, like ounces of truth with everything, but there's a lot in the way. So yeah.
There will be a guest waiver. I just wanted to mention that. Like, right now, the guests that we invite on the show, we understand that more often than not, they really enjoy the conversation. And so we don't worry about stuff like that as often as we can. But in this case, because I understand how the conversation is going to go, there's going to be a waiver, because otherwise they're going to demand that we take it down or some weird, ridiculous shit, because they'll feel embarrassed. And that's not our fault by any means. If you're embarrassed by your behavior, don't behave that way. And so that's the lesson there. And so we're really looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to this, honestly, because it is a challenge. It really is. And sometimes, and this is going to be, I think, the best part of these calls, and honestly, I'm really looking forward to this one thing. I don't have to be fucking pleasant. Like, it's really important to recognize that occasionally the best thing for someone is a swift kick in the nuts. And so sometimes that comes in verbal form. And so we're allowed to do that so long as we're not angry. See, that's the whole thing, is if you're emotionally invested, you've immediately lost your point. But because you've lost clarity. But if you can just maintain some calm, and that doesn't mean condone, that doesn't mean, just let them run with, extraterrestrial aliens and shit like that, like, channeling and talking through me and Bashar and so on and so forth. Like, you don't have to let that stuff go on and on and on without challenging it. But challenging it doesn't mean going, you're full of shit at all. There are ways that you can question it. You can even just question the efficacy of it, which is personally my favorite part of those conversations, because I won't tell somebody necessarily that they're not experiencing something. My question is, are you sure you're getting the most out of that experience by giving it a narrative? Right. Which I often find just undercuts everything that they're doing. Like the channelers, in my opinion, are just teaching irresponsibility, regardless of how good the insights might be. What they're saying is that it can't just come from you. And if they are saying it can just come from you, why isn't it just coming from them? You see, like immediately you're just like, hold up, something's wrong, false advertising, that kind of thing. And so it's going to be a lot of fun to be able to have these conversations, particularly for you. I have to say that because it's entertaining and important to be patient, because it is you you're talking to. It is you that you're talking to from a different perspective that's avoiding that simple fact. And so, you'll catch more flies with honey, right? That kind of thing. So it is a practice.
Yeah, no, I'm understanding that more and more because you start getting into the let's get this person, and it's the perspective of division. Like it's you maintaining that in just another fucking way, coming at it from the other end, and think, and because as soon as you said that, I was like, right, I'm just talking to myself. I'm not convincing anyone. I'm not doing anything. But that said, there's also in just talking to yourself a willingness to play whatever role that necessitates, whether it's Mr. Nice Guy or the villain. So it'll be interesting to continue to experience just that sensitivity and the back and forth. And I'm sure there'll be times where I do get worked up and then come back to things. So it'll be fun to explore that.
I still think we should call this segment Masters of the Metaphysical. I really do. I think we should. It's like putting out a big shiny hook with a worm on it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, what's that? Egotistical. Step right up. I don't know how long that'll go on for. It's kind of like Stephen Colbert when he had the Colbert Report, pardon me. He did Better Know a District. I don't know if you ever saw that segment, but basically he would go and talk to district representatives, like government representatives. And it got to the point where Nancy Pelosi herself was telling people to not talk to him. They were basically advising everyone in government to just not do an interview with Colbert because he was brilliant in that capacity. It's definitely one thing I miss about the current Colbert. I don't find that he can really spread his wings in the same degree or to the same degree. But yeah, those Better Know a District interviews were just fucking brilliant. Like he really showed how absurd all of it is, like their viewpoints, the fact that they're running for government at all, how little they fucking represent anyone, that kind of thing. So why not? Masters of the Metaphysical. Step right up, show us your ego.
That's awesome, because a certain mentality will, hook the shit out of that stuff. But I'm very curious about Better Know District now. Was that just he would like kind of interview them about?
Yeah. He would pick a district
stuff
and then go and talk to the government rep for that district. And he tried to highlight it on the map. He didn't get anywhere close to covering all the districts, but he was trying. I'm pretty sure he got into the 50s before they finally shut him down. Like he did a lot of them.
Damn, that's awesome. Cause that's where people's security comes from. It's like, they know it all. They know what they're doing. They know what's best for me. It's like you start showing them what's behind the curtain, and the sweaty, great and powerful Oz isn't so great and powerful, and starts bringing up all sorts of questions about what's going on here. So yeah, that'll be a fun one.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fun. This has been just a hell of an unexpected episode. I like this hour-long format. Admittedly, I have so much more that we can talk about, but that's the whole point. Leave it for next time, right? Thank you, dear listener, for joining us. Thank you, Jazz, for jumping on here and shooting the shit with us. As always, we really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you in the group. Thank you, everyone, for making Dualistic Unity everything that it is. And if you haven't checked out the season finale for season 4, I definitely recommend that you do that. Season 5 is going to be a hell of a journey, as we're going to recap some stuff and we're going to point back to season 1, and we're going to try and cover some things over again from a slightly different perspective. I have plans, is what I'm saying. So we will let you go here. Thank you so much for joining us. Andrew, anything you'd like to say?
Excited for season 5. That season 4 finale was a very fun one, and appreciate everyone for tuning in, and